transformer. I'm just being myself, but I've got to be me too. Silly of me to think that I couldn't bring myself to be you. I will be holy, benevolence, be honest, but don't stare though. Be careful, cause I'll kill you. Be kindness, that's why I'm dressed quite neatly and easy and discreetly. They seek me, they reach me and see me, they believe me completely. I'm a real life, why ain't I? Between me and you, I ain't dying. I can transform, I can transform, I can transform without you trying. Behold the beautiful and bold. Every day I wake up to be you. But it's simple, but I still can't understand why. Or can I? I'm a microchip on the whole block. And you know not, but I was a robot, and that's alright. You were just for sure shot with a gold block. Boy, I rolled back from something that you won't see again. But what the hell, might as well be my friend. I can transform, and I'm telling who I have to be again. Sing it. Yes, I can. Oh, I can do it. Why? Yes, I can. Oh, yes, I can. Oh, Lord, transform.
Because the Egyptians understood that the subtle bodies were conscious and could be communicated with, that meant they understood that they could also be programmed, and those that we normally cast off after death could be preserved for other purposes. That's why in the Egyptian tombs, you will find in the back of the tomb a kind of false door with a hole cut in it. And in the Egyptian text they call that a ka hole, because that's what the ka, or life body, is supposed to move through. So the initiate understands that if you understand the way that your own subtle bodies and energy centers are set up, you can then tap into any spiritual power in the universe or any piece of knowledge that you need to attain by knowing where to tap into your own structure. This is a very high attainment that only a fairly small number of initiates have fully attained. What is the way that the human being is put together? What's our structural format on which all of our initiation practices will be built? Because initiation practices are built in knowing, for example, what subtle body of the human being we're interacting with, or what energy center needs to be activated for us to perform certain functions of higher consciousness, or certain practical spiritual activities in the world. And so we've broken this up into two parts. The first part, that we're just going to get into right now, is the aspect of the structure of the human being that is related to the systems of the subtle bodies. How many subtle bodies do we have, and what are their particular functions? The subtle bodies of the human being are, in fact, detachments from higher planes. So if we talk about the physical plane, the human physical body is a detachment from the physical plane that's given to an individual human spirit to become our physical vehicle during our earthly life. After death, when the spirit leaves, the physical body goes back to the physical earth that it came from. And we describe the way this is true for all of the higher bodies. The etheric life body that we have is a detachment from the universal life force, what the Chinese call the universal chi field, that we bring into our life, into our physical body, to animate it with life during our physical human lifetime. And this body of life force is what was depicted in the Egyptian tradition when they had the ram-headed netter named Khnum working on a potter's wheel and forming a kind of duplicate of the human physical body. that we would call today the etheric double, and that they called the Ka, something that had the form of the human being's body, that would be put into the body and would animate it with life forces. The astral plane is something you hear a lot about in modern metaphysical studies. It's basically the first true consciousness level of higher planes. And so we have an astral body, and our astral body is a detachment from the astral plane to become our consciousness body. And so we described earlier that all of these different subtle bodies are taken from the planes of existence around us. So we have all the spiritual planes inside of us. This is the classical spiritual teaching, that the human being is the crown of creation, and the Hermetic teaching, as above, so below. We have reflected into us all of the higher principles and even the higher planes in our own structure. So the initiate understands that if you understand the way that your own subtle bodies and energy centers are set up, you can then tap into any spiritual power in the universe or any piece of knowledge that you need to attain by knowing where to tap into your own structure. So that's a foundation for what we're about to get into right now. We also described in Class 1 that the real source of these spiritual planes and the subtle bodies is in fact the universal body of the Godhead, the One, as the Greeks referred to that unity being behind all of existence. And so from that perspective, classical traditions understand that if we talk about the mental body of the human being and the mental plane in the higher worlds, that's actually the mind of God spread out in the world, because there's nothing else that could be a foundation for that level. And so the physical plane and our physical body are all parts of the physical body of God. So all the different planes, all of our subtle bodies are parts of the body of God at its different levels. And at the highest level of unity, it becomes the unified Godhead, the One, Brahma, the Wu-Ji, many different names and different traditions for that unified source of all creation. One of the first things we want to bring out is that there are different systems of subtle bodies that are taught by different spiritual traditions. And that's because they are, in these different traditions, intentionally structuring the subtle bodies of their initiates in different ways. This is a very important principle for us. You will not get the same structures in your energetic and consciousness bodies training with, let's say, a given school in the East that you might get training with a given school in the West. Even in different schools in the East and West are not the same as other schools, even within that general tradition. Because everything that we do with our consciousness, every thought, every emotion, every feeling that we have, has an effect on our structure. And so what practices you're given to do by the spiritual tradition that you work with will create very different activations of energy centers and different energy movements between these energy centers, which will create different structures literally in your energy body. And that will structure your consciousness. So connected to this idea that different practices will structure human beings differently, and this is taken advantage of in the different systems of different traditions, the same thing is true for how we understand the structure of the spiritual realities that we're working with. So if we are working in a system that has 5 different subtle bodies, that's going to make possible different types of practical work than a tradition that teaches 3 subtle bodies, or 4, or 7. And following up this concept further, we can see an example from the Egyptian mysteries. And in the Egyptian mysteries, we can see that they had a particular understanding of the subtle bodies that's quite different than what we have, for example, in modern Western metaphysics. In modern Western metaphysics, we'll talk about something like the human physical body, the etheric life body, the astral body of consciousness. And these are like things that are a part of the human being, but they're not described in such a way that we understand them as being separate beings in themselves. We don't tend to describe in the West today that your physical body, your etheric life body, your astral body are themselves separate conscious beings. But in ancient Egypt, this was understood. Now, by understanding the subtle bodies from this perspective, it then opened up possibilities to them of particular types of practical spiritual work that would not have been obvious if they had seen it from a different perspective. So, for example, as we describe in our classes in the biogeometry system created by Dr. Ibrahim Karim from Cairo, Egypt. We describe in the foundation training of biogeometry the way that the ancient Egyptian priesthood understood that the life body of the human being, that we call in the West the etheric body, and that the Egyptians called the Ka, because it had its own separate level of consciousness, but that consciousness was not highly developed, the actual life body of the human being, that normally after death will leave the physical body and then break up and go back to the universal life energy, the universal chi field, that life body could actually be preserved from breaking up and maintained coherent on the earth for particular purposes by the priesthood. And one of those purposes would be that it could be used to protect the tomb of the deceased person after death. That's why in the Egyptian tombs, you will find in the back of the tomb a kind of false door with a hole cut in it. And in the Egyptian text, they call that a Ka hole, because that's what the Ka, or life body, is supposed to move through. And on the other side of that false door in the back of the tomb is a wooden statue that has the same form as the physical body of the person that has just died, because that is what the life energy body is used to resting within, the correctly shaped form of the physical body. And so all these types of mysteries, as we described in the biogeometry training, become much more easily understood once we understand these frames of reference. Because the Egyptians understood that the subtle bodies were conscious and could be communicated with, that meant they understood that they could also be programmed, and those that we normally cast off after death could be preserved for other purposes. So we're not going to go further down that road right now. We're just going to say that's an example of what we're talking about. Seeing the subtle bodies from different perspectives will allow you to take different types of practical spiritual activities, learn new types of skills that would not have been obvious seeing these realities from a different perspective. And again, doing practices that's based on these different perspectives will structure your subtle bodies in different ways. Now, where we want to start with our study of the subtle bodies of the human being in the different tradition is the tradition that comes from India. So with the Indian tradition, we have a system of 5 what they call sheaths, and this in Sanskrit is called the koshas. Now they call them the sheaths, the koshas, because they see the subtle bodies, including the physical body, as essentially a sheath or a vehicle that the true self of the person, the Atman of the person, can then incarnate into and use as the sheaths for the spirit to act through in the physical world during their earthly life. So this Indian Vedantic system of the 5 koshas begins at the highest level with what they call the sheath of bliss. This is the Anandamaya kosha, and it's called the sheath of bliss because this particular sheath that is around the human spirit core, which again in some parts of the Indian tradition they call the Atman, in other parts of the Indian tradition they give it other names, but in this particular Vedantic system they would call it the Atman. And so around that core of the human spiritual essence, which is itself a very blissful state of consciousness when you connect to your spiritual core, around that is a sheath of energy, the Anandamaya kosha, the sheath of bliss, that itself, when you connect to it, has a blissful state of consciousness with it. Some sources associate this sheath with what's referred to in the West as the causal body. And causal body means that this is the essential part of ourselves that creates a type of a pattern for our life on earth. It creates causes in our life on earth. In the deeper parts of the Indian tradition, the causal body is connected to the idea of karma. Karma is the law of cause and effect. The things you have done in the past create structures in your energy field. They create particular types of karmic attachments that are going to play out in your life. So certain things are built into the structure of these higher subtle bodies that then manifest your karma in the world. So that's one aspect of this idea of the causal body, which again some Indian sources associate with this sheath of bliss, the Anandamaya kosha. Now, to really understand this at a deeper level, there's a very beautiful frame of reference that's given in the Indian tradition with the interplay between the 2 primal polarities of Shiva and Shakti. and all types of practical energetic work in the human body and with the work an initiate can do with the energetics in the world around us are based on the interplay of this ultimate consciousness of Shiva and the ultimate energy of Shakti. So these are two primal polarities, masculine, feminine, positive, negative, consciousness and energy in their interplay. And in the discussion in the Indian tradition about this, they describe the way that these two forces interplay in a sense as lovers playing a game. And from that perspective, Shiva is always in the center. Shiva is in some ways the principle of the center, where everything is always connected to the divine. Everything's already connected to that blissful state of ultimate essence. And so Shakti wants to play a game, which is to, with her powers of energy and creation and energetic transmission that we always associate with the Shakti, she wants to create all these different manifest worlds, all these different planes of existence, and then she and Shiva can play in those worlds as lovers. And Shiva raises the question with her, which is, if his nature is always constant and is never changing, how can he be in her world and in these worlds of existence? And she replies, based on the principle we just described, that he will always be in the center of all these parts of creation, and that around him, this dance of creation will always take place. So that around the essence of consciousness connected to the One is going to be the play of all the energies that's going to create all the manifest worlds and all the different things, all the different beings of creation. And so within the Indian tradition is one of the most beautiful descriptions that we have in any tradition of this primal interplay of consciousness and energy, of the primal yin and yang polarities as they act out both within our own lives and in the world around us. And embedded in this knowledge is all types of deep spiritual principles. Everything from practical work in Indian Tantra for the way that two human lovers interact and can raise their consciousness through their interaction, to the way that we can work with structures in our own physical and energetic bodies or things outside of us. And we can always find a place that we can connect to the center, that we can connect to the primal source, to the primal bliss, in the centers that are present in everything, which is a very important principle that, again, we go into in quite a bit of detail in a practical way in our Egyptian biogeometry courses. So this first sheath that we're talking about is the sheath of bliss. It is the vehicle for the human being that's closest to the spiritual core, and it has this blissful nature to it. Now, from this Vedantic perspective of the five koshas, the next sheath, as we come down toward the physical and more dense levels, is called the Vijnanamaya kosha, and this means essentially the sheath of wisdom. This is a higher consciousness body that contains our discerning intellect and higher forms of knowledge. It's the higher mind that can really understand things of a spiritual nature. Some Indian commentators associate this with the higher level of us becoming conscious of ourselves as a separate individual being, because these commentators see the Anandamaya kosha, the sheath of bliss, as being so close to the core of the human being that it's hard to get a real separate sense of self at that level. It's at this level of the sheath of wisdom we begin to get a sense of separate self. The next sheath, as we move downward into densification, is the sheath of mind, the Manomaya kosha. And this allows us to process the information brought in by the physical senses, the senses of the physical body, and that allows us to perceive and understand the physical world. The next sheath is the Pranamaya kosha. And prana, of course, is the word in the Indian tradition for life energy, what we call the etheric in the West, or chi in China, is termed prana in India. And so the Pranamaya kosha is the sheath of vital energy, the sheath of life energy. So this is the life force body that animates the physical body. And in the Indian tradition, within the yogic methods of initiation, they use the pranayama system to work with the breathing and to affect the pranic life body of the human being. And this can be used for all types of higher initiatory purposes. Now, the final of the 5 bodies is called the Annamaya Kosha. And Annamaya Kosha means literally the sheath made of food, because this is the physical body. And of course, we have to take part of the physical world to build up our own separate individual physical body. While we're an embryo in the mother's womb, our mother takes in physical food, and then that connects to us through the umbilical cord, and it builds up our physical body in the womb through the food the mother takes in. Then after we're born into the world as a separate being. And of course, all this is a metaphor for how we begin within the womb of the Godhead, and then we are put out into the world as a separate being. This is really a microcosm of that with mother and child. So when a child is born into the world as a separate being, then we take in food. First, the milk from the mother's breast, and then all the different food that's present for us in the world outside, and that food builds up our physical body. That's why in India they call this the sheath made of food. It is the dense physical body. It is a detachment from the physical world itself. In the Indian tradition, they understand that one of the most vital ways to work with the physical body is through the brain and the spine. And so many higher initiatory practices that you find in India are based on activations of energies and circulations within the cerebrospinal system. So for example, in the high aspects of the Kriya Yoga system from the Himalayas, this has to do with learning how to run particular energies up and down the spine in particular patterns and connect to particular locations in the head that then accelerate human consciousness and human spiritual development. So these are the 5 subtle bodies or sheaths as seen from the Indian Vedantic system.
I'ma cook, that's how shit go. Fendi, Prada, in it. Into quantum physics. Alien and I done heard about the bitches on the earth, so I think I'ma visit. Niggas coming at me acting like they hard, yelling fuck me, fuck you too. Don't get it twisted when I spit it scientific, cause the niggas that's with us do shoot. New cool, think you messing with a Jew, foo. Dark matter, aka melanin, outer space, black power, Zulu. Yell it out like Louis, yelling out moo boo. Yell it out like Wayne, yelling out Suwoo. Cause I'ma wreck them, and I'm coming from a whole nother spectrum. Try to throw me in the flames, take away my name, kick me out the game, but I ain't gon' let them. It's a fascination with the science of creation, I am God, look at how the way shit go. Take it to a whole nother motherfucking level when I say I made that hoe. I'm a beast, boy, with the intergalactic flow. Traveling dimensions from another planet, but I spit that flash shit though. That shit go, damn, that shit blow. Put me in the laboratory, I'ma cook, that's how shit go. I'm a beast, boy, with the intergalactic flow. Traveling dimensions from another planet, but I spit that flash shit though. That shit go, damn, that shit blow. Put me in the laboratory, I'ma cook, that's how shit go. In the beginning it was Adam, A-T-O-M. I am the Higgs boson, meaning that I was there way before him. I kick logic, science, astrological, and I be spitting you a verse. Feel like you probably fucking with me, you the first, but in the parallel universe. All up in my face, oh, you think you something? Atoms are almost empty space, so nigga you ain't nothing. Telling everybody that it's on, we can spray. I know that ain't you. The cells in your body got their own DNA. I know that ain't you. With my adrenaline and venom, I can turn them into a minimum amount of matter in a murder mode. Screw face, I am the omnipotent, a verbal evolution, coming with some shit you never heard before. Like genes, chromosomes, theories of existence. Ain't no telling where I take you. Bio photons, turning on codons, activating divine nature. I'm a beast, boy, with the intergalactic flow. Traveling dimensions from another planet, but I spit that flash shit though. That shit go, damn, that shit blow. Put me in the laboratory, I'ma cook, that's how shit go. I'm a beast, boy, with the intergalactic flow. Traveling dimensions from another planet, but I spit that flash shit though.
shit go. Damn, that shit blow. Put me in the laboratory, I'ma cook, that's how shit go. Niggas coming at me. Niggas coming at me. Niggas coming at me. That's how shit go.
America. Oh, America. Yeah. America. America. Sweet land of liberty, y'all. I'm doing this one for the struggle. And everybody doing brother, sister, daddy, your mother who living in the gutter. You want better cars and a better heart, another star, your home yard, and a place to park. You want a trusting wife and a better life, a bigger crib and a home cooked meal. Every single night, hell, feel what you going through. But I could've warned you when it's time to be a man. Do all you can, see other lands, and don't be living for the other man. Take time out, set it in, be the better man, and closely watch your friends, and then you'll understand a little better then. But on the other hand, you so stubborn, and you be starting. And ever since you made president, we ain't even seen you since. You need to visit our schools, rebuild our church and home, and stop killing my own kind and leave my earth alone. And stop tapping my phone and searching my brawn, and keep your personal feelings home when you bend on my phone. Do it for the weak and the strong, and each his own. Do it for the main goals when all the teachers gone.
This wasn't told to me. It was sold to me. Getting nothing free.
No
way, not in America.
Not America.
Not America.
Not in America.
Our country, liberty. And liberty. That'll never be.
No
way, not in America.
Not this America.
Not in America.
No.
You only got $2 and give less than a
Then you would.
Got a nice home in a Lexus truck.
You would.
World champions and you MVP.
You would.
4 degrees and a PhD.
Still.
Use your platinum card, you need 4 IDs.
Then use it.
If your skin is brown just like me.
Then you would.
Got a promotion and a fat raise.
You still.
From the islands and your peoples was enslaved.
You would.
No matter how much your get paid.
You still.
Shot by the cops at a traffic stop. I sell by coastal, international. They into catching you with satellites from deep space. Now, who invented in the first place? They said America's the original birthplace. Who getting 10, 20 life on their first case? Mine.
This game wasn't told to me. It was sold to me. Getting nothing free.
No
way, not in America.
Not America.
Not America.
Not in America.
Our country, liberty. And liberty. That'll never be.
No
way, not in America.
Not this America.
Not in America.
No. I'm doing this one for the kids in the street who ain't missed a beat. Do it for the deaf and the blind and those who don't even need. Do it for all the children of the corn and the unborn. Do it for the speedy trials and all the lies you done sworn. How you gon' teach a man, old Mr. Crooked, man, when your whole congregation driving brand new Benz and bike, brand new sins, lied on a million man, and all my brothers, sisters, them dad and them doing time in the pen. Again, America told me,
It was sold to me.
sold to me.
Getting nothing free.
No
way, not in America.
Not America.
Not America.
Not in America.
Our country, liberty. And liberty. That'll never be.
No
way, not in America.
Not in this America.
Not in America.
No.
This game wasn't told to me. It was sold to me.
Sold to
Getting
me.
nothing free.
No
way, not in America.
Not America.
Not America.
Not in America.
Our country, liberty. And liberty. That'll never be.
No
way, not in America.
Where I take you by your photons, turning on codons, activating divine nature. I'm a beast, boy, with the intergalactic flow. Traveling dimensions from another planet, but I spit that fly shit though. That shit go, damn, that shit blow. Put me in the laboratory, I'ma cook, that's how shit go. I'm a beast, boy, with the intergalactic flow. Traveling dimensions from another planet, but I spit that fly shit though. That shit go, damn, that shit blow. Put me in the laboratory, I'ma cook, that's how shit go. coming at me. Niggas coming at me. That's how shit go. Niggas coming at me. Niggas coming at me. Niggas coming at me. That's how shit go.
Don't wake me, I'm still dreaming. I don't see you, I can't feel you. I'm alone for real in my mind. I'll feel this all night when my life takes flight. This black abyss, this pit, it all seems shades of gray. I'm never ready for the light of day. This isn't just in our mind. We're suspended from space and time. This isn't just in our mind. We're suspended from space and time. Why do you hurt me? This reality. Why you smile at me? Show me your fallacies. Dreams hold me, never let me go. Where reality will wake me, I don't know. This isn't just in our mind. We're suspended from space and time. This isn't just in our mind. We're suspended from space and time. Am I dreaming? If so, then why? My body's back on earth. Only spirits can fly, soaring through dimensions of love. Kind only my father speaks of. Scenery changes, spins, and it rolls. So does the color
human consciousness evolves over time. And with this evolution of consciousness, there needs to be changes in the path to spiritual initiation, the path to which we learn to understand and directly experience higher spiritual realities. What we need now for an independent path of spiritual initiation, which many people are already on, is a clear body of spiritual knowledge. This is the classical spiritual teaching, that the human being is the crown of creation, and the Hermetic teaching, as above, so below. We have reflected into us all of the higher principles, and even the higher planes, in our own structure. If you understand the way that your own subtle bodies and energy centers are set up, you can then tap into any spiritual power in the universe, or any piece of knowledge that you need to attain, by knowing where to tap into your own structure. The Holy Grail tradition, one of its core teachings, comes from one of the original meanings of the term Grail, which in earlier times was the term Gradalus. And the term Gradalus is what we would call today in English gradual. And so Gradalus, or gradual, means that we go through a process of initiation as a gradual, incremental process. The Holy Grail mystery is a particular path of initiation for every human being today, regardless of their tradition, regardless of their bloodline, regardless of any other factors. It's core for all human beings. This is connected to what we're discussing right now about regaining the memory of our past incarnations and who we are as an individual, unique spiritual being, different from all other human beings and all other spiritual beings, according to who we've been before and who we are now. And that gaining this type of karmic memory is a gradual process. You don't remember it all at once. You begin to get bits and pieces of it. And it's extremely important that we don't fall into the trap of the influences that will tend to come in once we begin to look into our past incarnations, where we have the beings of a one-sided, unbalanced spiritual direction, what was described classically as Luciferic beings. And again, beings that don't understand physical incarnation and the purpose of it, but rather have a one-sided spiritual nature. As soon as we start looking into our past incarnations, you can be guaranteed they will start coming in and influencing our thoughts and our feelings, and they're going to start telling us all these things about these incredible people we were in the past. We were this great initiate and we were that great initiate, and all these incredible, glamorous things about our true spiritual identity and what we're meant to do. And very commonly this happens when people get an overinflated sense of their own spiritual development and become a little guru with their own little esoteric group that follows them. And their head gets very puffed up and things go way, way off track. So it's very important that we don't fall into these traps of glamour regarding our past incarnations. If we really were, let's say, a disciple around Christ, or some famous spiritual master from the past, or something of that kind, our memories of this are not based on glamour, because those lifetimes were not glamorous. They were not the way that they get presented in modern text, or in films, or things of that kind. These were hard lives. These were challenging lives. These were lives that had significant suffering and pain. The people that actually live those lives remember those things. They don't see it from that external glamorous perspective. And so that's when you can know that these memories of being someone famous or important in a previous lifetime are more authentic, which is that they don't appear glamorous at all. And in fact, rather than you're feeling in some way elevated above other people through these memories, what you actually feel inside is a feeling of great responsibility, that you carry something in you that needs to be put toward the service of other people. And again, your memories of this are not always happy or easy. The thing to take away from this is that in modern traditions like the Rosicrucian tradition, there's a very strong rule, which is that anything we remember about our past incarnations, we keep to ourselves. We never talk about it publicly, because that can easily lead us to ego inflation. These are claims to authority that we don't need to have. They attract the wrong kind of attention. Then we need to see the current stage in our ongoing crystallization of our spiritual structure. And we're going to say quite a bit in this teaching section about understanding what our structure really is. Our current lifetime is one stage in an ongoing sequence of patterns of how we are alchemically developing into our true spiritual potential and destiny. And so once we have a sense of who and what we've been before, and who and what we are right now, we begin to get a sense of what stage we're at. And this allows us to begin to make informed choices about what spiritual practices we want to do, because we'll be clear about what needs to crystallize next. And the next thing we need to become clear on is why we chose to incarnate in our current conditions at this time. And this brings us to understanding what our spiritual tasks are for our current lifetime. And it's very important that we do these tasks, that we carry them out. The vast majority of people today, I am very sorry to say, but I have seen repeatedly, are not fulfilling what we might call their karmic contract, what they agreed to do before they incarnated. Now, just the fact that you are interested in these topics and you're trying to figure these things out and develop yourself spiritually means there is a part of your will that is pulling you toward greater spiritual development. And you can see around you that there are many people that are not on this type of path. They're completely materialistic. They have no awareness of this sort of thing. And so one aspect of this question then of what are our spiritual tasks for this lifetime is that when we incarnate, we take what's known esoterically as the draft of forgetfulness. And the draft of forgetfulness is where we forget who we are and why we came here and what this is all about. It's part of our initiation trials in this life to have to actively work to regain this. When we don't remember them consciously with our conscious mind, what happens is that the impulse toward our spiritual tasks goes deep into our will forces. And our will forces are primarily sleeping. Our will forces are subconscious. And so we'll feel these impulses where we're interested in and we want to know more about spiritual topics and spiritual development. Until then, it's up to our will to keep pulling us forward and to try to wake us up to remember. In the beginning was the memory. Now, when you answer these types of questions, which is where am I going and who will go with me, that will then become fairly obvious. And so that brings us to our next topic, discovering our own unique energetic structure. So in this section, we're going to summarize some of the key concepts that we've taught in this course related to knowing our own energetic structure. And then we're going to add in some other important aspects, just introduce them at this point. And they'll form a kind of a bridge between this online course and our future online courses that go into more depth of esoteric teachings and initiation practices. So the first thing we need to be aware of is that every person has a unique configuration in their own energy and their consciousness. That configuration of their energy and consciousness leads to the activation of specific energy centers in their body more than others, and specific energetic connections and flows of energy movements from one center to another. This can even take the form of particular types of geometries in the body of energy, which have specific purposes and effects on the person's consciousness and energy. One of the first things that any esoteric teacher will do when he meets a person on the path, or a person that's going to be a student of some kind, is they will look into their energetic structure. Because the person's energetic structure reveals their level of maturity, their present capacities, and all spiritual teachers know that a certain stability and crystallization of parts of the structure of a person is essential in order for them to be able to understand and work responsibly with higher work regarding spiritual realities. Now, this is a very rich topic with many different facets to it, and we find through karmic research that it's through our struggles and striving and to a great degree suffering that we have had in previous lifetimes that has created what we experience as our greatest strengths in our current lifetime. This is a type of karmic compensation for our suffering, and it's the purpose for these difficult experiences and trials that we have in the earthly world. As we've mentioned before, no matter how intense our suffering is, in time we will forget it. But all of the gifts that we got, all of the strengths and the change to our core structure that we got through overcoming those challenges will become a permanent part of us and become the strengths that we enjoy the most in our daily life. Now, understanding our energetic structure, every thought that you have, every feeling, every impulse to action that you have creates particular energetic movements and activations in our subtle bodies. And this is connected to one of our core principles in spiritual science, that consciousness and energy are two sides of the same coin. They constantly affect each other. It's a two-way street, in other words. So that if you do work with your consciousness, that work will then reflect in energy movements and activations in your subtle body. If you do practices based on energetic movements, so Qi Kong and things of that kind, those energetic movements will change your consciousness. We need to be aware that the spiritual practices taught in different spiritual traditions have been intentionally crafted by the teachers in those traditions in order to create specific structures in the subtle bodies of the initiates within that tradition. The person's subtle body is being formed through these practices in such a way that they can then perform the functions that are focused on by whatever that particular tradition is. And different traditions focus on different types of functions and abilities. One particular tradition will focus on your developing very strong healing abilities with the etheric life body. Another will do almost nothing with that, but will focus on being able to discern particular effects on consciousness. And so one aspect of this is looking for the geometric forms that are created in the subtle bodies through the structuring process. This can be something as simple as particular triangles of energy that are formed in the energy body, where, for example, 3 activated centers will be linked up together. Or it can be something more advanced, like looking at something like the Tree of Life pattern, known in the Jewish Kabbalah, and that has offshoots in other traditions, like what in the Daskalos tradition in Cyprus is called the Symbol of Life, which is based on the same basic pattern. And this is a more complex pattern of 10 energy centers in the body and their energy pathways of connection. As we're looking at this next deeper aspect of studying structure, we can look for these types of geometric structures. But that's easiest once you've actually learned what these geometric structures are and what they signify. And that's best done through a higher level type of sacred geometry education that is based on initiation. When it's based on initiation work, sacred geometry becomes what the Rosicrucians refer to as learning to read the secret script, because these are the actual archetypes or patterns that everything in our world is based on. And they connect us in higher level initiation work to directly perceiving the thought forms from the mind of God that lay down all of these patterns. And the final thing to mention here about our learning to perceive our own parts of our energetic structure as we're giving these bridging concepts to more advanced work is looking for aspects of our structure from the perspective of different systems of energy qualities in the subtle bodies taught in different traditions. So for example, you can look at it from the perspective of Chinese medicine, where you look at yin and yang energies in the body as simple polarities, and also the system of the 5 elements or the 5 phases, in which all of these different elements in the body work with one another in particular cycles. And so for example, you'll find if a person has focused too much on Kundalini practices and raising fire energy in the body, they may have ended up creating great difficulties in their own health and energetic balance by having burned out the water element from the body. And so seeing it from these different perspectives will illuminate different things that's going on in a person's energetic structure. Or you can examine it from the perspective of the 3 doshas of Indian Ayurveda, or from the perspective of the 4 different ethers in Rudolf Steiner's etheric physics that comes from the Rosicrucians. All of these becomes frames of reference or perspectives that we can use to be able to really understand subtle levels of a person's structure. Now this then brings us to the topic of us making informed choices about what practices we're going to do based on our energetic structure. Now in this course we've really focused on some of the real fundamentals, absolutely essential. Doesn't matter how developed you think you are, the practices we've talked about in this course are truly essential practices. Understanding the need to have balanced work in active and receptive meditations, and also the 6 essential exercises, which are the ones that, as we've described, help to harmonize and balance all the aspects of our core development. They'll help to neutralize detrimental effects from other types of spiritual practices that may lead us to becoming one-sided otherwise. They will help to guarantee our success with our spiritual development and our different types of spiritual exercises that we engage in. As we look at aspects of our different subtle bodies, and if a person has problems with their emotional body, for example, that our 3rd essential exercise, which is connected to illuminating our feelings and also the control of the feelings so that we don't have to externally express every feeling that we have, but instead we relax into the feeling. and let it become integrated into us instead of being expressed externally in an uncontrolled and sometimes destructive way. Another example of this, as far as our choosing spiritual practices, is that it may be that a person that is very spiritually ungrounded, that has difficulties in their everyday life, that they have not fully incarnated in the physical body, and they don't even feel themselves in the body very strongly, may be attracted to learning advanced practices like out-of-body travel. And what you'll actually find is that this is something they have a natural subconscious tendency toward because they're already partly out of their body. They already don't want to be fully incarnated. And so they're naturally attracted to learning about being fully out of the body and out-of-body travel. And there's nothing wrong with learning these skills. These are natural skills at higher states of development. But we have to look at what's going to create the most balance and harmony according to their current structure. If they're not well incarnated presently, then they'd be much better served by doing work of a Qigong type, where they work on the etheric body and they focus on the feeling of etheric vibration and being actually present within the etheric vibration in their physical body, particularly in the lower energy centers of the body, the ones that are in the abdomen region, and then with the energy channels that go down into the legs, all the way down to the feet, and to the kidney 1 point in Chinese medicine, that's at the sole of the foot that connects us to the earth energy. So a person who is not well grounded, who is not well incarnated, who spends time opening up the lower energy centers of the abdomen, the leg channels, and then the channels in the feet that connect to the earth, will get much greater benefits for their spiritual development than focusing on out-of-body travel at that current stage of their process. That's what we're talking about, choosing practices based on your energetic structure and being aware of this. Another example of this is that normally today when you go to a yoga class, the yoga class has a particular set of standard asanas or postures that they will lead you through in a sequence. It'll be different from one class to another based on who a person's teacher was and what sequence was that they trained in. But in higher levels of Indian Hatha Yoga, the teacher is trained to be able to actually perceive aspects of the energetic structure of the students that they have. And they will then assign them particular asanas or postures, sometimes pranayama breathing practices, that are based on balancing whatever things are out of balance currently in their body of energy. Now they do this based on concepts usually from Indian Ayurveda of the 3 doshas. And so, for example, if they have a student that has too much pitta in the body, too much fire energy, they don't need to give them postures or breathing exercises that's going to increase the fire in the body. They need to give them ones that will sedate the fire and help to increase other qualities. And by the same token, if a person has too much vata, too much air element in the body, they don't need to do practices that increase the air element. They need to sedate it and to increase these other elements. And so these are some practical examples of what I'm talking about regarding choosing spiritual practices based on our structure. This is really essential to understand, and unfortunately it's not discussed much in modern metaphysics. But for your independent path of spiritual initiation and for our new spiritual science, this is a really fundamental issue for us. And so we've all heard the phrase, you can't take it with you, in regards to you can't take your material possessions and accomplishments in your earthly life with you when you pass through the gate of death. And that's absolutely correct. The thing you can take with you is your structure. What you take with you is the way that you have worked with and the degree to which you have illuminated your thinking, your feeling, your willing, the activation of energy centers, the connections between them, the stabilized geometric forms that are part of your structure. This is what you take with you, because this becomes essentially the core foundation or blueprint that makes you who you are. This creates your future spiritual destiny. It helps determine what your experience after death is going to be. Are you going to be primarily unconscious and have to be guided by higher spiritual beings through the afterlife and back to your next life, like a person who's deaf, dumb, and blind in the physical world because you don't have fully developed organs of spiritual perception because you didn't work on them during your earthly life? Or will you be able to be more conscious and more autonomous in that after-death journey and returning to the next lifetime? It'll also help to determine things like what spiritual realms and beings you're attracted to and that you go through in this after-death process, and what you're attracted to and what you get as your life conditions in your next incarnation. Your karma is laid into that structure. and everything about your activation of your potential and what your next conditions of life are going to be, both in the spiritual world and in the physical world, are all based on your structure. That's why this is such a vital topic. And this work on our structure can most effectively be done while we are physically incarnated and conscious in the physical body. We can't put it off until we go into the spiritual world. The most important work needs to be done here. That's the gift of being here and being in a physical body. In Rosicrucianism, there's a very strong rule that all the powers and understandings gained on the path will be put to the service of other people. And so that's like the first rule in Rosicrucianism. Otherwise, as you develop the abilities, you will get that temptation of, well, I could get what I want right now because they don't understand this process, but I do. There are many different spiritual systems in the world that have different types of initiation programs that a person goes through. And the Rosicrucian system is one that's been very influential in the West, but actually it's sometimes hard to get information about what their actual system of development is. What do we actually mean by initiation or an initiate? Because the terms are used very generally in modern metaphysical circles. But if you look at people that are being presented as initiates, they are often extremely different. One technical part of this is actually the structure of their consciousness and the structure of their subtle bodies can be quite different from one to another, although they're being presented as initiates within different systems. There are three different aspects of initiation or becoming an initiate. In one of these, what is actually being illuminated begins with the thinking process, with actually knowing about non-physical realities, knowing about the greater spiritual realities that we come from, and the spiritual depths of oneself. This is linked to the spiritual centers inside the head. And this is also linked to the illumination of the thinking process, so that with this process we actually know consciously the structure of the spiritual worlds, how we interact with them, how they influence us on a daily basis. And within this Rosicrucian system, that would technically be known as an initiate, someone that actually understands the systems. In this path of illumination, we find that everything is a thought form from the mind of God, and all those thought forms have a pattern to them. And the current term that we use for understanding those patterns is sacred geometry. So sacred geometry is a universal science for understanding the patterns of creation at every level. And so no matter what tradition you study with, they will work with sacred geometry. Because the sacred geometry at the highest level is a pure, packed thought form from the mind of God that shows you the pure pattern of everything that's manifested from it. Now the next level is that of the clairvoyant. And from one perspective, we could say this is linked to the illumination of the heart and the feeling life. The Rosicrucians talk about a process within an initiation in which at a certain point, when the heart becomes open and unarmored, and we cultivate this feeling of unconditional love, there's an ignition of a kind of spiritual spark within the heart. And what happens then is that they describe it as an etheric rose light arises from the heart and moves up to what's commonly called the third eye center. And with that rose etheric stream, it enters into the centers in the head, that area that is technically at the third ventricle of the brain and was known as the cave of Brahma in the Indian teachings. This is a particular area that's open in the head that has a space between the pineal and pituitary glands. And as this space becomes illuminated, it leads to direct spiritual vision. So the third aspect here is that there's also the cultivation of action or of the will. And this is linked to the belly, or what in Japan they call the hara, or in Chinese alchemy they call the lower dantian, the lower will centers here. And through the action or willing form of illumination, one is able to take action esoterically. You're able to actually use non-physical realities to change things on the physical plane. Now, at the most extreme form of this, we have things like actual physical alchemy and the transmutation of one physical substance to another. But this is usually attained after going through multiple steps of being able to transform something that is less dense. And that is normally etheric energy fields. So the actual vibrational transformation of energy fields, energy healing, things of that kind, is something that you find very strongly on this path. So the person that can actually transform things using spiritual forces is referred to as the adept. That gives us a bit of an overview for how this fits together. Within the Rosicrucian work, you find at a certain point that the consciousness body of the human being has 3 centers that can be worked on and awakened. And those 3 centers are around the head, the heart, and the hara. And this is really a universal teaching. If you study with the Buddhist, they'll talk about the thought, speech, and action. If you study with Sufis, they'll talk about the head, the heart, and the hands. All these different traditions are working with the same concept. If you studied Chinese medicine or Chinese internal alchemy like Qigong, you'll know that they have the upper, middle, and lower Dantian. They refer to these as elixir fields, because when we understand what these actually are energetically, they are a kind of spiritual elixir field that we can work in and illuminate the forces of. So, depending on where we focus on primarily, we can first begin to develop the capacity of understanding things in a conscious manner, the patterns behind them, become the initiate, or directly perceive spiritual realities, the clairvoyant, or directly manipulate the spiritual forces, hopefully for a good outcome, and that's the adept. Initiation is really a process of becoming aware of who am I, why am I here, where do I come from, and how do I develop a process by which I can become more self-aware and accelerate my process of development. Along the path of initiation, as you begin to understand processes other people don't understand, there can be the temptation to use that knowledge to manipulate other people, or to manipulate all types of things. Let's say you understand psychology and somebody else doesn't. You can manipulate them with all types of things in neurolinguistic programming and things of that kind. What words do you use? What tonality do you use? How do you present the information? You can manipulate them all over the place. And so in Rosicrucianism, there's a very strong rule that all the powers and understandings gained on the path will be put to the service of other people. And so that's like the first rule in Rosicrucianism. Otherwise, as you develop the abilities, you will get that temptation of, well, I could get what I want right now because they don't understand this process, but I do. So initiation and inner alchemy. Alchemy has to do with the transformation of something from a base state to a higher state. But there's an important thing that's hidden in that, which is that the base state has to exist first. You're turning lead into gold, but there had to be the lead there first to create the gold. So this means that hidden within, all types of lower structures are the seed of its full fruition, very much like the classical illustration of the caterpillar and the butterfly. You don't know looking at the caterpillar that over time its entire structure has laid within it the ability to become a winged butterfly. But it's the exact same thing in the human being. So we develop the physical body. We develop the body of life force. We develop our consciousness. But then we come to the point of developing our self-awareness, the I am presence. And that's where we are today. Human beings have developed this, and now we're at this critical point of developing the I am self-awareness. Now the inner alchemy of this is that once we have developed that fire, and this is represented in the esoteric Christian tradition as the flame above the head of the disciples at Pentecost. It's a literal flame that ignites a spiritual structure that moves in a vertical axis through the human body. And at this energy center above the human head, it illuminates to be the center of the Holy Spirit within Christian depictions. But I've worked with people from many other religions that know all about this first center above the head and its ignition into higher consciousness. So as we develop that aspect of ourselves can now illuminate with light and transform with the fire the lower bodies. That means that then we can train our I am spiritual self-awareness to actually transform our consciousness to a higher level. It's an alchemical transformation of the consciousness to become something different of a higher nature. And then it can then transform our entire body of life force, the entire etheric body, chi, ki, prana, to a higher level. And then it can actually transform the physical body. So that then leads to the question of, okay, from this really big picture of how things fit together, what does one actually do as a system of initiation practices? So one of the most fundamental practices for the Rosicrucians are what they call the 6 basic exercises. Now the 6 basic exercises were talked about by Rudolf Steiner as something that if you did nothing else, do these. Because some types of occult practices that you do could actually end up being harmful to you. But any of those harmful effects could actually be neutralized if you practice the 6 basic exercises. The first 3 parts of them are again working with the basic idea that we have 3 basic soul faculties. That's the same thing as saying that our astral body has 3 different aspects: the thinking, the feeling, and the willing. Thought, speech, and action for the Buddhist, head, heart, and hands for the Sufis, upper and middle, lower Dantian for Chinese Taoists, etc. We have these 3 primary centers: thinking, feeling, and willing. So the first thing we have to do is like what Gurdjieff talked about. We have to begin to self-observe. We have to observe ourselves through the course of the day. We have to observe, what am I thinking? What am I feeling? What am I doing? That act in itself, something also described by the Buddhist in great detail, will actually begin to use the light of our consciousness to illuminate the thinking process, to illuminate our feeling process and our willing process. What this allows us to do is we can then begin to see how much of what we go through every day internally is completely unconscious. It's just one reactive state after another. You get a particular external trigger and you have a particular reaction to it. And so this is the foundation. If you did this, you would end up reaching the goal if you did nothing else. If you don't do this, nothing else you do will matter. You have to do the self-observation, and it's much harder to do than it sounds. Another practice was called the backward review. The backward review is very important to do at the end of every day. In Steiner's own initiation school, he made it a basic practice for everybody. What the backward review is that at the end of your day, as you're about to go to bed, the meditation to do is to intensively from that moment when you're about to go to bed, go backward through your day in reverse order. Now I'm at the moment just before I went to bed. Now I'm at the point where I went to the bathroom. Now I'm at the point where I watched TV. Now I'm at the point that I had dinner. Now I'm at the point that I'm driving home from work, etc. You go back through the day, all the way back to the point when you were last asleep. It might have been a nap. It might have been early that morning. And there's very deep spiritual processes behind this that we're not going to get into all the details of now, but it relates to some very important energetic processes in a human being. So one of the things is that by going backward, thinking backwards, we're actually developing a new strength, like we're flexing a muscle within our etheric life body. The etheric life body is our body of memory, and the etheric body holds all of our life forces. When we begin to exercise the capacity to think backwards instead of forwards the way we normally do, we're actually exercising something in the life body of memory that will become a force that can be used for higher initiation and alchemical purposes later on. Next, we have the observation of life forces, of growth and decay. Today we have this fantastic tool where we can use film equipment to literally see these, like Walt Disney films, of a seed sprouting and then becoming a plant and blossoming and fruiting and withering away. And we can see in a moment what the Rosicrucians classically did through a process of observation that would take an entire year. They would watch every part of a growth process. Now the observation of the life forces does something very significant, very important, and that is that it develops a particular type of clairvoyant faculty inside of us to see how things move through life processes from one stage to another. And so this is a real divine mystery. Every human being holds this divine mystery, and to see what's held within it. Then, of course, the study of spiritual science we talked about before is fundamental, because we have to put down those concepts that allow us to logically understand how things fit together. Now, as we're studying things, we have a particular practice that we do. It's called the dissolving practice. The dissolving practice is an alchemical way to read spiritual text, so that if you're reading a text from any spiritual tradition, what you're actually reading as words on the page was the attempt of someone to crystallize into written language a direct spiritual experience that they had. The only way to get to the core of what they're trying to tell you without getting caught up in a fundamentalist literalist trap is to actually regain the experience they had they're trying to communicate through the words. That means the words have to be dissolved into a direct inner spiritual experience. And so it's a type of meditative reading. So once we can dissolve the spiritual text into the original experience, it opens up a great world for us and is absolutely vital for going to deeper parts of spiritual teachings that have been preserved. Now this is also connected to the next stage, which is something called the Michaelic Yoga. What we have is that in the ancient schools, they taught a particular type of breathing. And the way they breathed at that time was to actually make themselves more conscious by being conscious of the breath in and out. So there's a particular yoga of the inhale of the breath and of the exhale of the breath. And what Steiner is basically saying with the Michaelic yoga is that for the Rosicrucian we have the same inhale and exhale, but now it's done in pure consciousness. It's not done with the breath per se. So when we inhale, in a sense, the observation of the physical world, then that's what we would call a perception. I perceive something in the physical world. Whatever I see, I'm observing nature or a human being, whatever it is, I'm breathing in that perception. And that's a completely receptive activity. If I don't have a receptive soul, I can't do it. But we breathe that in and we hold the perception inside of us. It might be the movement of a child, it might be the growth of a flower, it might be whatever it is. And then we breathe out the concept. A concept is where now I can see inside what I have perceived, the spirit inside of it. And so instead of breathing in and breathing out, we're breathing in the perception of the world receptively, and then we're actively breathing out the concept where now I have perceived the spirit in the world.
I can transform, no telling who I have to be again. Sing it.